and I was,
Sorry. You were at someone's house and now you're muted.
so I was at someone's house and I was just sitting in their living room to get away from my kids to write a speech for Sunday. And I heard them, like the wife called the husband and he had it on speakerphone. And I overheard the conversation. She's like, hey, this person is selling their house, but they're going to put it on the market, but they just want to see if they can sell it to someone without a realtor first.
Okay. And I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop.
I thought it was interesting that seems like it's becoming more common.
Yeah. So did you leverage that? Did you land a listing because of that?
No, he's Canadian, can't work in the United States, and doesn't have a job.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. All right. Yeah, spend a fair amount of time. I know several of you do on this call as well because we have conversations about it, but just kind of tracking what's going on in the industry. And I don't know how to say this like delicately, so I don't think I'll even try it, right, Norm? Just get it out. In case you haven't paid attention, for the years that you've been in the industry, everybody's, and I said that intentionally, everybody's has an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion and a different angle. And it's not to ignore the different opinions and the different angles, but I promise you I can go to the internet right now and easily find 5 or 10 people that say this is the greatest market, for agents to make inroads in their business. And I'll find another 10 or 20 that say it's the worst, and all points in between. So what's the moral of that story? Show up and keep working. It's not what they say isn't changing the marketplace. And Norm, you hit it right on the head. The one thing that always wins is consistency. Always wins. It always wins. So that's the friendly reminder today.
Look, at the end of the day, you make your own luck, right?
Yeah.
There's this great, and it's probably not going to be the best analogy, but Matt, you knew this. I used to professionally skateboard a long time ago, and there's this analogy from this shoe company that was called it was like a 10-year campaign that they ran called "Make Your Own Luck," and it was a rabbit foot carrying his own foot because he said you got to make your own luck. And I've always taken that, and especially when it comes to real estate, because like you said, every like 5 years there's some new opinion that comes out about whether or not the market's going to fail or the market's going to gain, or now's a great time to succeed, or now's a fire sale, you better go get a quote unquote real job, which sounds torturous to me. So for me, like, I just think you got to make your own luck. No matter what circumstances are happening, there's going to be a silver lining under there, and you just got to create it.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Norm.
But I have this little saying that's attached to my computer. I read it every morning when I come into the office anyway. It says, we don't get what we want, we get what we are committed to.
Yep. I'm gonna take that one and give you a tangent to that. How many of you made it to the Gold Capital Partners annual shareholders meeting in the last week in your area? Do you remember the quote that Ron used at the end? If not, I'm gonna butcher it, but I'll give it to you as best I can. And I'm trying to remember where he read it. But you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. I mean, think about that. Any of you that have young adults in your family, they're very, idealistic, and a lot of times they're a little bit short on delivery, right? And part of that is just because life experience, they haven't, and I'm painting with a very broad brush, I know there's exceptions, but they haven't learned the benefit of being consistent and putting systems in place. There's an agent that I had previous brokerage down St. George, high producing, very much a Mike Ferry guy. I'm not kidding you. We couldn't get him on meetings because from a certain hour in the morning till about noon was his, whatever you want to call it, prospecting time, his SOI time, his reaching out, having conversations about real estate time. He never misses. And guess who consistently does, 100, 150 transactions a year, right? So there's really something to be said for that. Just remember, you can be idealistic and you do need to have goals, but remember, you're probably going to fall back to the level of your system. So make sure you're developing good systems that reiterate consistency and constant performance. So all great quotes. All right. So wanted to talk a little bit about some things that we have covered last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry. 2 weeks ago, we were covering some of the different disclosures, right? The unrepresented buyer disclosure, the notice of interest disclosure, how it dovetails with section 2.2 of the ERS, the recently updated one. I wanted to give us a break on disclosures, so we're not going to do seller's disclosures today. I know you're all sadly disappointed. I can see it in your face, Parker. But I did want to get to some things that we deal with on a very regular basis. So the first section is going to be the proper mechanics of offers, counter offers, cancellations, reinstatements. And I do that because there's a lot of lack of understanding on that and what is required, and just shouldn't be that confusing to us. I mean, in all actuality, this is one area that we're pretty consistently taught in our pre-licensing courses, right? And it's part of that 15% that is actually applicable, unlike riparian water rights, which very rarely, if ever, will you use in your career, especially in the second driest state in the entire nation. And I don't mean alcohol, I mean water. Wow, nobody even laughed at that joke. Come on, that was, oh, thank you, Deborah. That was Monday morning.
I'm giggling.
Yeah. Okay, somebody's paying attention. Either that or it's a really bad joke. So here's the problem. Have you ever had a situation where, somebody, you send over an offer and the other side doesn't respond by the what deadline? What's it called? This is the setup. Be careful what you say. Nobody wants to venture a guess.
The acceptance deadline.
The acceptance deadline. Esther, good job, because I can't tell you how many times I hear the response deadline. There is no such thing as a response deadline. It's an acceptance deadline, and that may seem like trivial, but it's actually pretty important. And here's why. You're either accepting the offer, right? Or you're countering the offer, or you're rejecting the offer. Now, I've asked this question before. If you don't respond at all, what is the status of that offer? Come on.
It's
Teams?
done, expired.
Okay, so we have one vote for expired. Any other terms?
Dormant.
Dormant. What is that? Some hibernation bear term? Is we went dormant, or it's a volcano. It may erupt anytime in the near future. All right, expired, dormant. I'm waiting for the one I really want.
Dead.
Come on. Somebody, anybody.
Voidable.
Voidable. That's one I was waiting for, but it's not the one I want.
Default.
Is it dead, Matt?
Dead. Okay. We got 4 so far, and we
I
haven't
think the offer's still sitting around, just waiting for something to happen that isn't acceptance.
Isn't it canceled? Canceled.
Oh, Dawn comes in clutch. Dawn comes in clutch. Okay. So all of those things, I've heard all of them. Dormant, I haven't heard, honestly, Norm. Esther, you used, I don't know, some street lingo. It's just laying around. It's in laying around status. It's voidable. No. Remember, there's 3 options specifically in the contract. You either accept it.
Negotiable. It's negotiable.
It's negotiable.
She's forward thinking. That's, you can say canceled, but I like her idea.
Okay.
Do you
Well,
know how many deals I have brought from the dead? I'm like, hey, that's still out there. We'll just counter it. Like it
Oh.
might be a week later. Like that was a crap offer, but we didn't get anything else. Let's go look at it again.
It's resurrected.
Okay. You know what? We're gonna come back to your statement, Deborah, because it's true, but I'm gonna put the proper terms on it. Back to what Don said. Remember, in the offer itself, it says you have three options. You can accept it, you can counteroffer it, or you reject it. If you do not respond by the acceptance deadline, it is deemed rejected. Okay, just let that settle in. I want that to be like into the deep recesses of your brain. It is deemed rejected. Okay? Now, Deborah brings up a great point. Oh my gosh, that's not true. And this is what I hear from people, including other brokers. Well, it's not dead because we resurrected it. No, actually, you didn't resurrect it. What you did was you did a counteroffer, which if you go back to your pre-licensing days, what is a counteroffer? It's an entirely new offer, which just happens to incorporate some of the verbiage that was in the offer that was deemed rejected. Okay, I know that's a little nuanced, but that's really what's taking place here. So I'm going to refine what you said, Deborah. The deal that didn't happen, you came back and created a new offer, which may or may not have used 99% of what was in the original offer, and you made a new offer out of it. That's really what's taking place from a contractual standpoint. So this is why I wanted to cover this morning and give you some of the wording that helps explain it, because you're going to bump into people. How many of you, okay, so that was the first scenario. How many of you have put in an offer and then you get a counter offer back from the other party that says the acceptance deadline of the first offer is now extended until some future date, which is doable? Come on, raise your hands. I want to see. If you haven't had that happen, you haven't been in the business very long. And you know what? We're not going to make a federal case out of that. But in reality, there's no need to do that, because like we just explained, the counteroffer that just got sent over has its own acceptance deadline, and it's pulling in the terms from the non-accepted offer into the new offer. So that's kind of like saying it's redundant, because we're saying the acceptance deadline of the first one is now extended, but oh, by the way, the very counteroffer that we're writing right now has its own acceptance deadline. So it doesn't hurt the deal, it doesn't negate the contract, but there's no need to do that because your counteroffer has its own acceptance deadline. Make sense? Let me pull this up on screen because I want you guys to see some things here. 2 seconds. Share. All right. So first of all, we should all, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because
Matt.
Yeah.
This James, just a thought. I've always thought that was weird because they have rejected the original offer. So it seems a bit absurd to extend the deadline to accept an offer that they've rejected, or to extend the deadline to accept an offer that they've already rejected, and by definition have rejected it by submitting a counteroffer.
Yeah. Yep. It is bizarre. Just so remember this too. I want to make sure we connected this dot. Section 9 of the reps, right? And let's keep things clean. Let's just assume the initial offer is a repsy only, right? But then somebody says, oh, wait a minute, we want to do FHA financing. So de facto, they come in and check this box in section 9, right? Do you remember what used to be in here that is now missing in the latest form? There was something in here that wasn't actually an addenda. There was a checkbox for a disclosure. Do you remember what it was? Lead-based paint disclosure?
Yeah.
You remember that? And, you know, several of us complained a long time, like, it's not an addenda. Why are you putting it in the addenda section? You know, that makes no sense. So a little trivia there. Okay, so my point in boxing this area is, now I'm going to ask for another one. How many of you have sent over an offer with, let's say, a blank addendum number 1 that changes something, and I don't know, FHA addendum, and then the other side responds back and they accept the REPC, they reject the FHA addenda, and they accept the blank addenda that had some other verbiage on there? You ever have that experience where they kind of do a Chinese menu? Yeah, we like this, and we like that, and we like that, but we're going to get rid of that. Go ahead, Savannah. Muted. There you go.
What's your input on doing? So I've seen recently a lot of agents have put limited agency in this section.
They check other and they put limited agency in the other.
Yep. And then include that as like the first addendum in the contract or something like that.
One, I would love to have a conversation with them. They're like, what are you thinking? That is a agency representation form. It's not an addenda to the REPC. Now, I think I can understand the thinking, right? They're trying to tell the seller and the buyer, again, if it's being done in-house. Let's stop there for a second. Different forms of limited agency. Savannah, you could have Parker representing the seller and Jeff representing a buyer. Still limited agency, but honestly, what real impact does that have on the terms of the purchase? The short answer is it really doesn't have anything to do with the terms of the purchase. It's an agency representation disclosure. So probably ought not go in there, to be perfectly honest, because it's not part of the REPC. Now, someone's going to argue and say, I can hear it already. Well, wait a minute. Up in section 5, it talks about who's representing whom. And my point would be, okay, so whatever we put in section 5, and if it is a scenario where, one company or one agent is representing both sides, this is the current disclosure of who's representing whom. The limited agency goes more in depth and talks about scenarios, especially the new one, and in-house sales and this, that, and the other. It's a disclosure. It's kind of like saying, if you go to section 7, this is a close cousin, right? This first section. Oops. Bad parameter. I couldn't agree more. This first section A that talks about there is a seller property condition disclosure, and that will be part of seller's disclosures, but we don't write it into the REPC, right? Because it's a disclosure. It's a document that stands on its own. So have I beat that horse to death enough? Disclosure, like limited agency consent disclosure, would stand on its own and really should not be incorporated into the REPC itself. Would it negate the contract? No. Is it probably not the best practice? Yes. So I would advise the agents going forward not to put it in there. Okay, so we had section 9, talking about the additional addendum. My point is simply this: remember, and if you run across this, be caring, be empathetic. Channel your inner Texas, and in your head at least say, "Bless your heart." You don't get to Chinese menu, right? And the reason why is literally what it says in section 9. There are or are not addenda to the REPC containing additional terms, right? And it talks about it at the beginning of the document that says, this REPC or plus any addenda is the offer, right? And we remember this from our pre-licensing days. Whatever is specified in the REPC and in section 9, consider that compressed into one book known as the offer, singular, right? And like we started off with, you can either accept the offer, which includes everything that's checked in section 9, you can reject it, or you can counter offer it. And that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to expedite and just say, well, we're not okay with these terms. The right way to do that is to send over their own counteroffer and say, addendum number, FHA addendum to be removed from the REPC, as an example. That's the way it should be handled. Okay. All right. So I'm going to bounce over here to a blank addenda, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So how many of you have had the experience where you get a counteroffer, and in the blank section, they have 20 items listed that are already covered in the REPC, right? Or they put in the blank section, all other terms to remain the same. All right, so let's walk through this. I've got a lot of highlighting here, and we're going to walk through this really quickly. So this, meaning
I make
this
them redo it. I make them redo it and send me a new clean offer. I hate dirty offers.
So let me ask you this, Deborah. How do you phrase that when you tell somebody that?
I say, I hate it when realtors try to be lawyers. I want to keep this simple. This is too much. It's redundant. This is already covered. It doesn't need to be part of the deal. I really don't want to mess. So if you could clean this up and resubmit it, let's just have a nice clean offer.
All right. I like the last part. Maybe not the first part. And I'm joking when I say that, but I'm kind of serious, right? Don't ever try not to interject I want, I feel, I hate, and I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying when you use those words, it makes it easy for somebody to, one, get entrenched and dig their heels in because all they're hearing is what you want and not what's best for the deal. And I know I put you on.
I usually build a rapport with them first and say, hey, thanks so much for sending this offer. And I'll be like, hey, I noticed that this is in there and this is already covered. Like, I'm nicer about it. But
okay.
yeah,
All right. Okay.
I do say, hey, will you do me a favor? Do you mind just sending that over again? But clean it up. I really just want a good, clean offer. I don't love, 10 addendum as part of the deal. So let's try and keep this as clean as possible. Before we send addenda over, let's talk about it so we're not countering each other back and forth
love
and
that.
creating unnecessary.
I love that approach. Hey, let's agree so that we don't have to do the back and forth, and so that our clients don't get frustrated. Let's make sure we're on the same page before we put it on the page. So I love that approach, Deborah. That's awesome. Okay, so the first thing, I'm going to mute you just, there we go. So this is going to be a little pedantic. I don't mean this to be talking down, but these are the important things to remember when you're dealing with the offer, counter offer, what's required, what's not required. All right, so this word, this, meaning this document, this addenda, whether it's checked as an addendum or a counter offer, right? This, right? And it's in relationship to a real estate purchase contract that's already been submitted and is either been, countered or rejected, right? Countered or rejected. And then, of course, we're going to make the linkage with an offer reference date of such and such. And here's the first key verbiage, including all prior addenda and counteroffers. So let me say this a different way. So if, all addenda and counteroffers, anything that was there previously, right, is de facto incorporated into this, meaning this document. That's why you don't have to go back and say, section 12 still applies and section, right? Because the verbiage is already there. Here's the point I want you to remember. Anything that is not specifically excluded from the previous offer is de facto included in this counteroffer. Does that make sense? The default is everything's included unless you strike it. And that's important to remember, because if there's a term you don't like, you better specifically strike it. Make sense? So that's why, including all addenda and counteroffers between the two parties, blah, blah, blah. And then it says the following terms are hereby incorporated as part of the REPC, right? So it can sound a little counterintuitive. There's two flavors of this section. There's either additional terms that I want to incorporate, or there can be the negative version of it, which is I want these things excluded, right? It seems counterintuitive because it says the following terms are incorporated. Well, you can incorporate an exclusion. Does that make sense? Wow. I got one head nod. Okay. Either you're not paying attention or it didn't make sense. Tell me it makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense.
It made sense. All right.
Yep.
So it can either be things that you're adding to the original offer in this counteroffer, or specific items you want struck from the original offer. Okay. Now here's the remaining governing verbiage that you need to be aware of. And here's the thing, you guys. Agents see this all the time. It's a blank addendum. And if I stripped off all the coloring and the marking, you just like, yeah, boring boilerplate document, right? Why do I even need to read it? And that's the problem, is the agents typically don't read it. So to the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffers, these terms shall control. Okay? All other terms of the REPC, including, you're going to hear that verbiage a lot, including all prior addenda and counteroffers not modified by this addendum shall remain the same. All right. So you with me? If you haven't specifically struck it from the deal, it's in. Yes, Norm.
No, you said make sure that you read it, and you know we've seen this one how many times, and so
Hundreds.
Yeah, and I had a client once. He actually changed even on the exclusive right to sell and on the addendums. He added stuff to it, and just glancing at it, you couldn't tell. He used the same font, and man, it was amazing. He even added extra lines, and I went, I didn't know there was a 2-point Z.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's amazing what they'll do. And so your point is well taken. Don't ever assume that it's right. Your job, your fiduciary of reasonable care, is to review the document. And that doesn't mean to glance at me like, oh, look, there's an addendum. That's not reasonable care. All right. Now, here's the scenario that we get with this, I get the most often. And it's like this. When you're in that sequence of offering, counter-offering, and going back and forth, somebody, let's say you put a counter offer in that said purchase price to be X, due diligence deadline to be Y, and settlement deadline to be Z. Okay, so let's just go with those three changes. And the other party comes back with their own counter offer, and they say purchase price, and they mark your offer counter offered, and they say purchase price to be X plus $5,000. The most common thing I see is their misunderstanding, where they're like, well, we didn't accept your offer because we countered off with the purchase price, so the dates didn't change. What do you guys say? Did the dates change if they counter offered just on price?
Including,
there you go, Esther. If they didn't like the dates that you had in your counter offer, right? Remember this verbiage, including, right, to the extent that this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior counteroffer addendums, these terms shall control. So when they send over their counteroffer with only the price, they're saying they're okay with the dates you modified, even though you did not accept their counteroffer, you countered their counteroffer. I know that sometimes, you know, that can seem a little confusing, but just if you always go back to, if I don't specifically strike it, if it's anywhere in the sequence of offers, counteroffers, it is in. It is in. That makes sense? That's the easiest way I can tell it to you. If you don't specifically strike it. So if in their counteroffer, if they weren't okay with the dates, what they really should have said is purchase price to be X plus 5,000, And the due diligence and the settlement deadline shall remain the same as declared in section 24A and D, or B and D, right? That's the way it should be.
Matt, can I ask you a
A.
question?
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
So what about if they're sending over an counter and they change something, but you counter that counter? So do you, you have to, and the only thing that
Are you
want
talking
to
that, are you talking the same terms? So for
Yeah,
instance,
no, different terms. They added something else. And so you only like the one thing. So you agree, like, how do you do that when there's a counter to a counter?
so can you give me an example so we can make it clear for everybody?
Sure. So now you put me on the spot.
Let's use one as purchase. Let's use one as purchase price.
Okay, one is purchase price and the other one the settlement date.
Or let's do closing costs, because that's one that tends to be common.
Okay, yeah, closing costs. So
the original counter offer was purchase price to be increased by $5,000 and seller to pay $10,000 in closing costs.
Yes.
Okay. Then what happens?
So then we just counter that closing costs to be $5,000.
Yep.
So that means we're agreeing to the new purchase price, right? But we don't want the closing costs to be the $10,000. We want it to be the $5,000. Correct?
Correct. So the purchase price, since it wasn't specifically excluded in your counter, bleeds through. The best example I can use is for those of you that are old enough and you in school or in college and your professor did a transparency overlay on a projector up onto the screen and it had some information, right? And then they put another transparency on and it blocked out some of the stuff. This is kind of how contracts work. If there's nothing blocking it out, meaning specific language saying, then it's going to bleed through to the final line, you know, to the end line.
Matt, so, this is James. I would just say, in my simple mind, I just go backwards, right? The last term about closing costs rules, the last settlement deadline in the series of addendums rules.
I like that because if nothing was said in regards to the purchase price, well, then the last statement made was the one on the original counteroffer before yours came through, and so it bleeds through. So yeah, whether you look at it forwards or backwards, and I kind of like your thinking, James, the last statement about a particular term bleeds through, and if nothing was said about any of the terms, then you're going back to the REPSI. What was the default in the REPSI?
Matt?
Yeah.
Should we complicate things a little bit more?
Sure, go ahead.
Everybody strap
Wait,
on.
Parker, you know what, Parker? I forgot to put my timer on. So yeah, don't be offended by this, but I'm going to put my timer up so we finish on that. Go addendum.
Okay, let's say we have addendum, or we have the contract. We have addendum 1, 2, and 3. And I decide I like the terms of addendum 2 and 3, but I reject addendum 1. Is addendum 1 rejected, or is the whole contract rejected and we have to now start all over again?
The whole offer is rejected.
Don't put
okay.
Right. This goes back to what I said. When you write the REPSI and you check in section 9 that the offer, the entire offer, includes addendum 1, 2, and 3, if you reject any part of it, you have rejected the offer. Now, that's not what the other side is intending. They're thinking they can just be like, hey, we didn't like that one, so let's just make the offer, you know, the REPSI plus addenda 2 and addenda 3. And guess what? They can do that, but they'd have to write it in addendum 4, which would be a counteroffer that says addendum 1 to be removed from the contract. And then
that was the next case scenario. Let's say we have addendum 1, 2, and 3, and then a counteroffer is submitted on 4, and that counteroffer removes addendum 1.
Absolutely viable.
Okay.
Because your addendum 4 is a counteroffer. It's its own new offer. It's saying, okay, since we didn't like your structure, REPSI plus addendum 1 through 3, we're going to create our own offer, which is your offer with only addenda 2 and 3. That's the new offer. So
what's the best verbiage to use in a case like that? let's say counter offer, I say addendum 1 rejected, addendum 2 and 3 applicable. Like, how would you draft that on verbiage?
Listen, I'm glad you brought this up. Remember this, you guys. The most direct and the simpler the language you can use in contracts, the better. Right? What we see a lot of is, well, because such and such, and you get the family story and this, that, and the other, we would like addendum 1 to be removed. No, contracts are black and white. It either is removed or it is not. Right? We would like the seller to pay $6,000 in closing costs. How do you enforce that? Well, I can accept that. Well, I agree that you would like that. Is that enforceable?
Matt, I see this in addendums that are talking about the appraisal costs. So
Oh my
if
gosh,
the
yes.
appraisal comes in low, seller is willing to, and I used to write it, maybe I still occasionally do on accident, but seller is willing to increase or decrease the price by a certain amount.
Yeah. Make it more explicit. The seller will. The seller shall.
I like to leave the seller out of it and just say, if the addendum comes in this low or whatever the terms are, the new price will be.
Even better. Right? Just steer clear of wants, it's understood. Use explicit terms. I like your example, Esther. The new purchase price, in that scenario, the purchase price shall be, will be, and that's it. Keep it clean. No need for explanation. Explanations are for cover letters. Explanations are for a phone call when you send over the offer. It's not a good place in the REPSI or an addenda. Okay? That answer your question, Parker?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Okay, so looks like 17 minutes. So I want to make sure we get to some other things here. So cancellations. What is required on a cancellation? Does a text work?
No.
Why?
Needs to be in writing. Needs to be in writing. And it needs to be provided.
You got part of it. You got two of
it. It needs to be provided and presented to the sellers. I'm using the wrong verbiage there, but we'll say presented. So
I'm going to help you out, Parker.
It needs to be signed by the party who's canceling.
Say that again.
It needs to be signed by the party who's canceling.
There you go, Don. And where do we find that information? Anybody?
On the
right there. Notices. A cancellation is a notice, you guys. So section 18. Section 18.
I was so close. I was going to say 17. And I was like, oh, if I screw this up, Matt's going to bust my chops.
So you're right. It must be in writing. Okay. And that's where people are like, well, it is in writing. It's a text. Okay. Then go to criteria 2. Must be signed by the buyer or the seller giving notice. Text you can't sign. And no, that does not stand up. And please do not cite for me the one case in New York case law that is only specific to New York, where they used an email and they got a bizarre jury there and said it was efficacious. It's not true nationwide. It's not true in the state of Utah. So must be in writing, must be signed by the person giving notice. And Parker, as you stated, must be received by the buyer or seller or the respective agent or their brokerage or firm representing them. So good, better, best. I think when you're giving a notice like a cancellation, to avoid, well, I didn't get the notice, send it to the agent, send it to their broker. CC your own broker. That way they can see that everybody and their brother has been CC'd on it, and it kind of does away with the can I use the term on a Zoom call? The jackassery that sometimes agents involve themselves in. Which, by the way, here's a question for you. If you send it to their email, is that considered delivery?
I think so, but I would definitely follow up.
Very good answer, Deborah. Yes, it is delivery, and that's also why you want to send it to their broker. And yes, best practice is send it and follow up and confirm that they got it. Is that required? No. Do you want a headache? No. So go the extra step. Okay. I was dealing with one this weekend
It saves bad blood later. If they're pissed, they won't want to deal with you in the future if you treated them poorly. So it's best to just say, hey, it was great working with you. I'm sorry the deal didn't. It's good to try and save the relationship.
100% agree. As big as we think Utah is, there's only so many realtors out there, and there's even less that actually do the majority of the transactions. So preserving a relationship will serve you well in the long run. Don't screw people over if you can help it. Okay. I had one on Saturday. One of the calls I got was an agent. I'm not going to share any names or anything like that, but I want you to see the scenario. She's representing a seller. They go under contract a week or so ago, and it was a contingency offer. Not uncommon these days, right? We got to sell our house before we can buy it. So in section 2 of the rep C, the buyer, who we did not represent, checked yes. Some of my purchase price, I have to sell a property to actually make the purchase. Okay. They also had an addendum with the time clause allowing the seller to continue to market the property on the MLS and accept other offers. Well, lo and behold, Friday night, an offer comes in. It's $10,000 better than offer number 1. Offer number 2 is $10,000 more than offer number 1. So our agent gives proper notice, and y'all know that there's actually a addendum, right? There's an addendum specific to giving them notice. Please use it. Don't write your own language. There's protection in what attorneys have written, so use it. Anyway, she did the right thing, gave notice to the other agent. They had 48 hours to remove their contingency. What was the contingency? We've got to sell our house in order to purchase your home. Okay. And after the notice was delivered to the buyer's agent said, we're going to remove our contingency. Anybody see any problems with that? I mean, the original rep C said, in order to buy your house, we have to sell our house. Their house isn't sold. It's still on the MLS. Any problems with that? Can they do that? They can do it because if they don't perform, there's a remedy in place, right? Section 16 says we can take earnest money, we can sue for specific performance, or we can go for other damages available to us, right? So I've had this question, they can't do that, they're lying. Well, no, they told you up front when they initially submitted their offer, they have a house to sell. You then, in subsequent addenda, said, if you want to stay in place, you're going to remove that contingency. So you cannot back out on whatever the contingencies that were checked, and you take on some liability at that point. So it can be done, right?
Can you require that they provide evidence that they can perform?
You're going right where I was talking to the agent, and my conversation was basically this with the agent. I said, listen, they do not have to provide you additional information. There's nothing in the contract that says, like, specifically, explicitly that they have to. But guess what? Most of the agents we work with aren't as conversant as you all are in contracts. And so she said, I know that they're going to remove the contingency, but they're just going to use their due diligence to get another week and try and get their home sold. And we really want to go forward on this offer. I said, well, call the other agent and say, hey, in the rep C, you said that you had to sell your house and it's not sold. If you're going to remove the contingency, the sellers are going to require proof of funds or a letter from the lender saying that you can carry both mortgages. Now, that's a little bit of gamesmanship. Can I force them to deliver that? No. But guess what? It had the intended effect. And that's in fact what the other agent was trying to do, was just buy another week and a half to get their home sold before they lost their due diligence deadline. And when the agent put that forward to them, they said, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that, so we'll just send over a cancellation. Now they're going forward with, a $10,000 better offer.
So Matt, if you make an offer and imply or state that you can perform without sale of your home when you can't, that's what?
That there's the potential for contractual fraud.
So if you do that in the initial offer, by removing the contingency, you're doing exactly the same thing, right?
Yep. My point, James, is
Yeah.
once you're under contract, they've got certain contractual rights. And when we start talking about this, like we're doing right now you're talking about the world of litigation, and you never want to go there if you can avoid it. So that's why I would go in very strong with the request. Listen, you in your original offer in section 2 said you had to sell a property. We will allow you to remove the contingency, but we're going to require proof that you can carry both mortgages, right? Because there's a fundamental contradiction. You said you needed to sell that, you haven't sold it, you're putting us at risk. We'd hate to see litigation develop out of this. So can you provide us a letter from your mortgage provider saying you can carry both mortgages? And they're either going to say that again.
That clause hasn't been in the contract. The part about do you have to sell a property, that hasn't been in the contract very long. And that's for exactly that reason, is the attempt to buy time.
Yep. And so I think that really coming in strong with just a request going, hey, you originally declared this, your house is still on the MLS, it has not sold, we need additional proof. Otherwise, the subtle threat is then we're going to cancel because you're misrepresenting in a contract, and we'd rather not pursue you for contractual fraud. Right.
And Matt, what if they just sent over a counter? I'm just saying from the buyer, let's just say the buyer sent over a counter removing or changing that section from is to is not. And what does that look like then? How does that look like for the whole contract? And let's say the seller agrees to it.
Well, that's kind of what they're doing with the scenario we just said, right? We're going to remove the contingency, right?
But they had a time clause for them, right? So if they had a time clause,
but remember the time clause has been invoked because we have an offer number 2 waiting in the wings, right? And so this is such a key point, and honestly, I wish that the Forms Committee would take it a step further and say, if you remove this contingency, so initially, if you checked box number 2, right, and sometime during the under contract period, you're going to provide proof of funds, you're going to provide a letter from a mortgage provider saying you can carry both mortgages, or you will exit the contract. But it's not there right now, so we get to deal with it until there's a better REPC sometime in the future. Okay, I got a rapid, because I got 7 minutes to finish up. So cancellations in writing, signed by the party, delivered, right? And yes, good to get a confirmation. Please do not ask me if a text suffices. Please do not ask your broker or your office managers if an email suffices. It doesn't. It's explicit in the contract. Reinstatements, please do not just take a blank addendum and say, everything's back together. Please use the reinstatement addendum. It covers the key things that need to be addressed when a deal that has been killed, for lack of a better term, is being reinstated. It's important to, here's a simple example. If a deal fell apart, right, and was canceled, as far as a brokerage is concerned, we're supposed to get that earnest money back out of the trust account because there's no longer an active transaction, right? And when somebody just puts a blank addendum and says, hey, everything's back together, it hasn't addressed specific things like, oh, I don't know, earnest money that may or may not be there anymore, or dates and extending deadlines and et cetera, et cetera. That's why to use the form. All right. Really quickly, earnest money, faces of earnest money. This is important. We get a lot of different requests. Let me start with the obvious one. If you're so lucky as to do a mobile home transaction, also known as a car in the world of law, and I'm talking not attached to real property. If it's attached to real property, it becomes real property, right? But if it's in a mobile home park or anything of the sort, it is a car. It is the deal is transacted at the DMV. It is personal property, not real property. Our trust account, the official title of it is a real estate trust account. So please do not ask the office to put money from a personal property transaction into a real estate trust account. Okay, it's not just mobile homes. We get requests sometimes for, well, I should actually just get the office managers to chime in, and they probably give us a list of 10 things, but let's just go with this. Only real estate transaction funds can be in our real estate trust account. Otherwise, it's known as commingling of funds, and the DRE highly frowns upon that. They hate it. Go ahead, Parker.
So this would include the becoming popular small homes or tiny homes. This would include those as well. My understanding is Metro is willing to hold that for us on the title side. Is that right?
Hold what? Personal transaction funds?
Earnest money. Yeah.
Not earnest money.
Do we even call it earnest money? Like, what do we call it in a situation like that?
I'm going to give you the quick update on this. I'm working with an attorney right now. I hope to have in the next 2 weeks. I've been saying this for probably 2 years. We need to get a personal property transaction, AKA a mobile home purchase agreement. Dan McDonald is working on that for us right now, and we'll have a straw man to share with you. Yes, Metro will transact mobile home transactions. They don't love it, I got to be honest, but they will do it because we own them. And if we as agents need to do it, they will transact it.
I was told that they wouldn't.
Do they know they'll do that? Because I've been told no by them.
Me too.
How recently have you been told no?
About a month ago.
3 months.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I know down here in Pleasant Grove, Barb Twitchell, Charlie, they will do it, but they told me, Savannah, hold on. They told me we'll do it, but please do not advertise that we do it because we don't really care to do it. Go ahead, Savannah.
I'm actually working on one at the moment with Brenda in the Layton office, and they're holding about $500 of a deposit for us. So I don't know if it changed at all up north or what their feelings were.
I will get together with Wendy, Norm, and Don and get a solid answer on that. I think it's going to be the same. They do make a fee off of it, so I don't know that they're going to completely turn it down. It's not, the full burden cost of a real estate transaction.
If any of you have problem having somebody hold the earnest money, just send it to me.
Well, the whole point is on the mobile home purchase agreement, it will not be known as earnest money. It will be known as a deposit, just like you do on a car. When you go to buy a car over the weekend, this is the example I use, and you don't have the funds available, you put a deposit, right? You write a little note. I gave you $1,000 on your F-150, blah, 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 to apply towards the purchase price as long as I buy it within 3 days or 5 days. That's largely what it's going to be in the mobile home purchase agreement. Okay. Earnest money at title, please, please, please do not use your own blank addendum and just say earnest money to be held at such and such title company. We have a UAR form. Actually, it's a DRE form too, endorsed by the DRE, which makes it all the more reason you should use it, because if it goes sideways, they're going to light you up like we even have a form for this and you're not using it and you're one of our licensees. And it covers, important things, including a very strong disclosure saying if it goes to a title company, good luck until both parties agree to release their earnest money, it's staying in their trust account, or until they interplead it to a court. All right. Non-refundable and refundable earnest money and releasing it. Okay. Now, the market's been a little softer for the past 2 years, but think back to your COVID days or some other hot market before then to make your offer more appealing. We saw a lot of this, right? Out of the $10,000 earnest money, $5,000 to be non-refundable as of due diligence. Okay, let's stop there. That's the easy one. What does that mean, non-refundable? Does that mean we release it to the seller? You gotta love that music. Hunger Games. No, the answer is it only means it's non-refundable. Earnest money, you got to remember this. Earnest money is a remedy in the contract until the contract either closes or until it's canceled. It's still a remedy. So as long as the wording only says it's non-refundable, it's still going to stay in the trust account. Okay. If you want it released, then you have to have explicit language in your addendum that says $5,000 non-refundable and released to the seller on such and such a date. Okay. A couple of cautions there. When you release the earnest money, I think I said this previously, when you release the earnest money, you lose the second remedy in section 16. Section 16 says if you want to sue for performance, either side, buyer or seller, earnest money has to stay in the trust account. So if you release the earnest money and it's no longer in the trust account, guess what remedy you don't have? That one. So just be aware next time we're getting into a hot market, be careful about saying release the earnest money because you're losing some of your remedies in the default section. Okay. The other one that we get as office managers, yes, I'm thinking of you guys, is shall be immediately released. Okay. So what happens is we get the earnest money. Let's say we get it in the form of a personal check. Office managers, what is the outside timeline that we say we have to actually clear the funds?
10 days.
10 days. Now, it normally doesn't take that long, but we have some banks that are slower than others or small credit unions, and we're not going to put our money at risk until we know it's cleared and is in our trust account. So please do not write language in there that says, we're going to give you the earnest money on Monday and you must release it on Tuesday, because it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We will not release it. We can't. We don't have the money. It hasn't cleared. So write better contracts. Non-refundable, blah, 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 section 10. Oh, when a deal has fallen apart, and let's say we do have a clear breach in the contract, what is the process for returning the earnest money? There's several of them. Take your pick. One, we will only write the check to whose name is on the REFC, whether it's the seller or the buyer. Right? We get this quite often. Well, my dad gave me the check, for our earnest money. Can you just write the check to him? Nope, because it says we're bound by the REFC. It says if earnest money is released, it will be released to the buyer with a capital B or the seller with a capital S. There's no provision for us to release it to anybody else. If they want to give us additional documentation signed saying, yes, I, the buyer, now agree that you can write the check to the other person, cool, we'll entertain it at that point. But by default, we will only release earnest money to the declared buyer or seller. And let's see, what else is required? Office managers, what else is required to release earnest money?
Broker approval. We don't
Broker
have
approval of what? The cancellation. The cancellation. So what happens a lot of times is we get an agent who is a little anxious and says they did not perform. Right? This is my favorite one. They did not perform. We have passed the settlement deadline. We're entitled to the earnest money. There's a couple of problems with that, you guys, and I want these to stick in your head. Earnest money is one of three remedies. Why are you telling us to release earnest money? Has your client decided that's the remedy they want? You better have done your due diligence, right? Because there's nothing. What if you, without your client's knowledge or approval, said, well, I'm going to be the proactive agent. I'm going to get the earnest money and send it back to them. And then they came back to you and said, you know what? We think we're going to sue them for specific performance. You see the problem? The earnest money's out of the trust account. You don't even have that option anymore. And you did it without their approval. That would be a really bad day. Is it going to happen very often? No, but at one time is going to be a bugger. Okay.
So
Once I turn in earnest money, I never touch it again. I let office do that.
Smart, Parker?
So I guess I was thinking, I'm wondering, like, let's say we do have an issue where earnest money needs to be returned. It's probably better practice just to get an email in writing that says, what are your intentions with the earnest money? Do you want to receive it back, or do you want us to hang on to
Paper
it?
trail is always awesome. Yes. Here's the one that we didn't talk about, and it's my favorite, and it's the office manager's favorite, and it reduces risk. Use the earnest money conflict, or what's the title? Earnest money resolution form? Earnest money conflict resolution form. Horrible name. Horrible name. It sounds so bad. But the reason why that one's important is buyer and seller sign off on it. It shows the amount of the money. It shows who's it's going to. But the most important part is everybody waives their right to sue after that. It says this is the remedy. You cannot come back later and sue. So here's the final thing I'll say. If I'm representing a buyer and unfortunately their $2,000 of earnest money, we went past deadlines and it's exposed, I would strongly, strongly advocate for you to send to the other side with your client's approval the earnest money conflict resolution form saying, and trust me, it's the carrot dangling. They want that $2,000, right? If everybody agrees that's going to be the remedy. And in order to get that, they need to sign the resolution, which it shows, yeah, the buyer's earnest money of $2,000 is going to go to the seller. And they're probably not reading the other part. And so if you're going to forfeit $2,000, you may as well get some contractual gain out of it. And that contractual gain is no other avenues of litigation can come after you. So you're buying with your $2,000 some level of protection. I know it's not much consolation, but man, if you're going to spend the money, may as well get the protection of that form. Make sense? Okay. You guys are awesome. We successfully got through counteroffers, addenda, cancellation, and reinstatements, and the many faces of earnest money. If I were to leave you with a final stat, and I would love the office managers to back me up on this, I would say out of all of the things that we deal with on a day in, day out basis, I would guess 55, 60% of the things that take our attention deal with earnest money, because it's tied into cancellations, it's tied into getting under contract, it's getting tied into, oh, one last thing. I know the office manager will be happy I covered this. If you have your earnest money on transaction 1 and you want to move it to transaction number 2, you either have to have a conflict resolution form, earnest money conflict resolution form uploaded, or you have to have a broker sign off saying the cancellation on transaction 1 was legit, right? We go and look through all the addenda and make sure there's no conflicts. And then the third component is we need an email from your client saying, now that it's been approved, the cancellation's been approved, we give the company the permission to move that earnest money from transaction number 1 to transaction number 2 with the corresponding addresses. And we put a copy of that in both transactions. Whew. Office managers, I almost forgot that one. So listen, these are some of the mundane, but you know what? They're some of the things that we deal with on the most frequent levels, and you need to make sure you understand these concepts backwards and forwards to avoid unnecessary, trivial, yet annoying problems that can crop up if you don't know what you're doing. So hope that would help. I hope to see all of you. We've got a sales meeting in Pleasant Grove tomorrow, and then we have sales meeting in Layton on Wednesday. The following week will be South Ogden and St. Jeezy. So hope to see you then. James, I love your dog. It's always fun.
Isn't sales meeting in Union Park tomorrow?
Sorry, did I say PG?
Yeah, I
meant to say Central, which is this month in PG. We alternate offices. So yeah, thanks for that catch. And all of the sales meetings up north start at 9:30 for food, lunch and mingle and wants and needs. And then 10 o'clock is when we kick off sales meeting, and we are done by 11. Okay. Hope to see you, and have a great Monday.